The chip was warm. That was the first thing she noticed. Not the vote count on the display overhead, not the Arbiter Primarch's voice carrying across 49 broadcast frequencies, not the sound from the upper gallery that was too careful to call applause. The chip was warm because she had been holding it for 11 minutes. 3,000 years, that was what they had just voted to end. Humanity's seat in the conclave, the oldest continuous diplomatic standing in the known compact, gone on a count of 44-5. The Arbiter Primarch had read the result in his full voice, every harmonic frequency engaged, the sound designed to carry, designed to land with the weight of finality. She pressed the chip against her thumbnail and waited. What they did not know, what she had spent 31 years making sure they could not know until it was too late to prepare, was that the vote was not the end of something. No declaration, no warning, no chance to prepare. It was the starting condition she had been waiting for. The chamber at Convocation Anchorage Veldurath was carved from a single piece of compressed hull aggregate, pulled from the first ship ever admitted to the Orath Compact. The design choice meant to say, this place has always been here and will always be here. The floor sloped at exactly 1.4 degrees, a small thing, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it, so that the species seated at the outer ring always appeared, just barely, to be looking slightly upward at the podium. She had always found that detail worth keeping in mind. Grand Arbiter Primarch Drusselkhan stood at center platform in his formal document mantle. 7 layers of ratified agreements compressed and worn as clothing, each layer a different treaty, a different era, a different proof that the Vareth Compact had been on the right side of every agreement that had ever mattered. His forward 4 eyes tracked the chamber. His rear 2 recorded. She was still in her seat. The session had not formally ended. There were procedural items remaining. She had submitted her signal 11 minutes ago, before the vote was called, before the result was announced, before the polite sound from the upper gallery that was too coordinated to be spontaneous grief. The signal was gone. The 91-hour clock was already running. She did not watch the display, she watched the chip. Stay close. What she did next, most people still don't fully understand. And the part that matters most, that comes in a moment. 31 years earlier, the memo was 3 pages long and went nowhere. Vale Orson had been a junior intelligence analyst on a transit station with no window in his office and 1 photograph pinned to the wall above his desk. A woman he never identified to colleagues, standing in front of a building no one had been able to locate. He walked with a slight forward lean, the result of decades reading physical documents at a desk set slightly too low, and he had a habit of finishing other people's legal citations before they did, which people found either impressive or exhausting depending on the day. He had noticed the pattern. 7 species removed from the Orath Compact over 40 years, all removed on non-unanimous votes. None of the removal proceedings had checked, or at least, none of them had cited whether the founding document permitted removal on a non-unanimous vote. He pulled the founding document. It was 3,400 years old. It had never been amended. Article 3, Subclause 7. Drafted by a species that had been extinct for 800 years. A species that had apparently anticipated exactly this problem and solved it in advance, in language so plain it required no interpretation. Unanimous vote required for any removal to carry legal weight. No exceptions listed. No grandfather clause for prior votes. Just the rule sitting there, patient as stone, unread for 4 decades. Vale filed a 3-page memo. It went nowhere. He filed it again the next year, and the year after, and the year after that. 4 times, 4 years, the same 3 pages, the same polite acknowledgement, and the same quiet burial in a backlog no one had time for. Ambassador Davin Seluorath read it on a 9-hour transit when she was 31 years old. She was traveling light, 1 bag, 1 folder of session notes, 1 printed copy of the Compact's founding document she had been annotating since she was 29. Her handwriting in the margins was so small that colleagues called it the fine print of her fine print. She read Vale's memo twice, then she folded it and put it in her coat pocket next to the chip. That was the beginning of Operation Tether. She pressed the chip against her thumbnail, not for luck, which no one in her family had ever believed in, but for direction, which all of them had. The chip was matte black composite, roughly the size of a thumbnail itself, one face smooth from years of handling and the other still carrying faint laser-etched registry marks from the vessel it had been pulled from. Her great-grandmother had removed it from the navigation console of the transport that carried her to her first diplomatic posting, not as a keepsake, but as what the family called a heading reminder. Something to hold when you needed to remember which direction was forward. Her great-grandmother had passed it to her daughter to her son. Her son, Seluorath's father, had held it the night before his first session in front of the conclave. It's not luck, he had told her. You already know which way to go, it's just check the heading, make sure. The heading had not changed in 31 years, it had never changed. The team had assembled slowly. 6 people over 3 decades, no formal designation, no budget line, no record in any official ledger. Their meetings were logged as routine diplomatic coordination, which was technically accurate. Their work was logged under general research and analysis, which was also technically accurate. They had no name for themselves until Seluoreth used the word tether once in passing, meaning something that holds position without moving, and it stuck. Vale Orson had come first, obviously. Then Commander Orvine Thassel, who had a talent for repositioning ships without anyone noticing, which she described not as subtlety but as paperwork volume. Then Dr. Castle Dreven, whose intelligence filing system was so precise that her colleagues once discovered, entirely by accident, that she had been maintaining a parallel index of conclave administrative errors organized by type and frequency for 22 years without ever once mentioning it to anyone. Then Sen Orvath, who had spent 11 years building working relationships with 9 underrepresented species through the single most effective diplomatic method he had ever found, which was, in his own words, showing up and asking what they actually needed. An elder archivist Velorath, who was the oldest member of the team and the quietest, and who had spent 31 years maintaining the files of the 7 expelled species with the same care and the same update schedule as every active diplomatic file, because he said the difference between a record and a memorial was whether anyone kept adding to it. She had found them, or they had found her, one by one, across years, across transit corridors and session recesses and late evenings in reference alcoves where no one thought to look for people planning anything. Operation Tether had been running for 31 years from a room with no window and 1 photograph. 6 people, no weapons, no patrol vessels, no strike craft, nothing in any military registry anywhere. The entire operational budget across 3 decades would not have purchased a single armed ship. What it had purchased was something the Conclave had no category for, not a military threat, not a diplomatic maneuver, not a protest, not a petition, not a formal objection filed in triplicate and buried in a procedural backlog. A legal structure and architecture, something with weight-bearing walls. The Conclave's founding document required unanimous agreement for removal. 7 species had been removed without it. Every one of those removals was legally void. The Compact's official membership rolls had been factually incorrect for 40 years. Every agreement built on those rolls carried a procedural defect that ran all the way down to the foundation. They had not built a weapon. They had found a crack that ran through the entire floor. Commander Thassel had spent 8 years repositioning 312 human vessels to coordinates outside all treaty corridors. Every movement filed through standard transit notification channels. Every document in order. Not one vessel had moved toward anything the Conclave was watching, because the Conclave watched for military positioning, and 312 ships holding legal coordinates outside treaty space did not look like military positioning. It looked like paperwork. Vale, in one of their rare evening meetings, had described it this way: invisibility is mostly a function of paperwork volume. If you file enough unremarkable documents, the remarkable ones stop being visible. He had been right. He was often right. He had just been right very quietly for a very long time. Dr. Dreven's evidence archive had been growing for 22 years, or 31, depending on how you counted. 22 years of deliberate parallel indexing. 31 years of documented procedural irregularities pulled from session transcripts, administrative orders, membership records, broadcast logs, not intelligence files, not intercepted communications. All of it sourced from the Compact's own public record, formatted to the Compact's own evidentiary standards, co-signed at appropriate intervals, ready for submission as formal legal exhibits. Not leaked, not in violation of anything. Filed. Vale had found the clause, Thassel had moved the ships, Dreven had built the record. Orvath had built the coalition, Velorath had kept the names. 6 people, 3 decades, 1 architecture. The morning before the expulsion vote, she had eaten a protein block on the transit to the station, a flavor she had never liked, the kind that kept longest. She ate the whole thing without tasting it. She had been thinking about Article 3, Subclause 7, which she had read so many times that she could recite it in 4 languages, including one that was no longer spoken by anyone alive. She had been thinking about the extinct species that wrote it. 800 years gone, no record of why they had anticipated this problem, no record of what had prompted them to be so specific, so plain, so unambiguous in the language. Just the clause sitting in the founding document, patient and unread, waiting for someone to look. She had been thinking they knew someone would need it eventually, they just didn't know how long it would take. The 91-hour window had started the moment the vote closed. She had sent the activation signal from her seat before the session formally ended. A single short transmission, flagged in the system as a routine confirmation of receipt, which was technically what it was, and then she had put her hands in her lap and waited for the polite sound from the upper gallery to finish. Sen Orvath had been at Waystation Kashari 2 for 6 days, which was 4 days longer than he needed to be there for any official reason he had logged. He had 9 contacts across 9 species. His activation transmission to each of them was, in its entirety, "It happened, you know what to do." 11 words. All 9 responded within 40 minutes. She learned this later. At the time she was still in the chamber, watching Drussel Khan accept the formal congratulations of the upper chamber representatives, and she was thinking about how a species that wears its agreements as clothing has already told you everything about what it is afraid of losing. The Delavar remnant responded first. Their representative was a senior archivist named Orvine Veldurath, thin-limbed and near-silent in the way of her people, bioluminescent circulatory lines tracing pale blue patterns under translucent skin. Her transmission was one line: "We have been updating our grievance record for 90 years. We would like to submit it as an exhibit." The Delavar had no word for permanent in their language. They distinguished only between current and eventual. Their historians considered this precision, not pessimism. 90 years of records, updated annually, even in years when no one had been listening. The Kelorvath assembly took 6 hours, which was fast for them. They convened a full assembly before any commitment. They considered any agreement made without full assembly to be informal regardless of what it called itself. Their representatives were broad and dense-boned, four-armed, amber-furred, and their architecture was built to a minimum specification of 10,000 years. When they agreed to something, they agreed to it in full. They agreed. She was in the transit corridor when Sen's confirmation came through on her secondary line. She read it twice, then she kept walking. The Voral descent confirmed within the first day. Near human in build, blue-tinted skin, secondary skeletal ridges visible along the forearms. Their colony system had been reclassified as uninhabited surveyed space by Conclave Administrative Order 18 years ago. Their formal objection had been logged, acknowledged, and never acted on. A Voral diplomat who started a conversation did not expect resolution within their first century of trying. They had been patient in the exact way patience looks when it has no other option. They confirmed, no preamble, no conditions. By hour 40, 6 species had confirmed. By hour 68. Seluarath was in the reference alcove off the main corridor, the annotation room, her team called it, though it had no official name, when the Sunward Orvine representative arrived at Waystation Kashari 2. She heard about it from Sen, who described it in 4 sentences, which was more than he usually used. The Sunward Orvine were avian descended, hollow-boned, rustan gray feathered with a wingspan of 3 meters. They had no military capacity. The Conclave had considered them harmless for as long as anyone had kept records on them. Their representative arrived carrying a physical document. Not a data file, not a transmission. A bound physical document, thick enough that Sen noted its weight when he set it on the table. 90 years of Conclave procedural irregularities, updated annually. Documented even in years when no one was asking, no formal complaint was open, no action was pending. The Sunward Orvine had been keeping this record since before any current human diplomat was born. "We did not know if anyone would ever use this," their representative said. "We kept it because not keeping it felt like agreeing it did not matter." She set it on the table. Sen said it was heavier than it looked. No ceremony, no speeches, no room large enough to hold all of them at once. The 9 representatives signed the Declaration of Independent Compact one at a time, each alone, each transmitting their seal through separate relay nodes. The document assembled itself across 9 time zones and 4 relay hubs into something that had not existed 48 hours earlier. A legal structure with 10 signatories, full standing, and 1 foundational clause that Seluarath had written herself in the annotation room the night before. No agreement entered into under this compact may be dissolved by fewer than all parties who hold standing under it. She had thought about the extinct species that wrote Article 3, Subclause 7 when she wrote that line. Same problem, same solution. Different hand, different century, same direction. The Voral descent representative did not sign. He pressed the document instead, held it flat against the desk, applied slow pressure, and left a ridgeline in the paper. A physical indentation, not ink. It was how their species marked things that carried weight. She kept that page. "That is how they mark things that matter," she wrote in her notes that evening. "I wanted to understand what that felt like." By hour 72, the declaration carried 10 seals. Then Vale Orson came into the annotation room and set a folder on the table. He sat down. He did not begin immediately, which was unusual. He was the kind of person who began before he was fully seated. He opened the folder. The founding document of the Oreth Compact, Article 3, Subclause 7. Drafted 3,400 years ago, never amended. The conclave had removed 7 species from the compact over the preceding 40 years. Every removal had been conducted on a non-unanimous vote. Not one removal proceeding had cited the founding clause requiring unanimity. Not one had been challenged on those grounds. Every removal was legally void. The compact's official membership roles were factually incorrect, had been for 40 years. Every agreement, every administrative order, every reclassification, every trade corridor decision built on those roles carried a procedural defect that ran straight down to the foundation. They had not appealed the expulsion. They had not filed a counter-motion, a formal objection, a protest under diplomatic protocol. They had filed a legal instrument that unmade 40 years of the conclave's administrative record in a single motion. That night she read Article 3, Subclause 7 11 times. Not because she had forgotten it. She could recite it in 4 languages, including one no living person spoke anymore. She read it 11 times because she wanted to remember exactly what it felt like when it was still a secret. When the clause was still just words in a document no one had checked in 4 decades. When the weight of it still belonged only to 6 people in a room with no window. By morning, it would belong to everyone. She set the paper down at 2 in the morning station time. She put the chip in her left coat pocket. She did not sleep. At 4 in the morning, she sat down at the desk in the annotation room and opened the filing system. The submission was ready. It had been ready for 9 months. Every exhibit formatted, every co-signatory seal attached, every relay node in the transmission chain tested twice. Vale had checked the routing 3 times that week. Dr. Drevan had run a final index comparison the day before. The document was 4,100 words of careful, plain legal language, and it was the most dangerous thing she had ever held. She did not watch the confirmation screen when she sent it. She pressed the chip against her thumbnail and listened. The relay node makes a sound when a multi-registry simultaneous submission completes. She had listened to recordings of it so many times that she knew the exact pitch, the exact length. A low, steady tone, less than 2 seconds. It sounds, more than anything else, like a door locking from the inside. She heard it. Then she made tea. She set the cup on the left side of the desk the way she always did, and she sat there while the station was quiet, and she drank it slowly, and she did not think about anything in particular. The tea was too strong. She had been making it too strong for 20 years, which her father had always pointed out and she had never corrected. 40 minutes later, the conclave's broadcast infrastructure began to move. Under Article 17 of the original compact, a clause that had been in the founding document almost as long as Article 3, any formally submitted legal exhibit from a recognized co-signatory group had to be carried on the compact's own broadcast channels within 1 standard hour of submission. No review period, no editorial discretion. Contractual obligation written in plain language, sitting in the founding document next to the clause about unanimous removal, patient and unread. Dr. Drevan's evidence archive was 31 years of documented procedural irregularities. Session transcripts, administrative orders, membership records, broadcast logs, all sourced from the compact's own public record, all formatted to the compact's evidentiary standards, all co-signed by 10 recognized signatories with full standing. It went out on every frequency the conclave broadcast on. Not leaked, not obtained through any channel that could be challenged, not in violation of a single rule. Transmitted through the exact infrastructure the compact had built for exactly this purpose, carrying a legal exhibit that the compact was contractually required to carry. 49 species received it simultaneously. She finished her tea, she rinsed the cup, she put on her coat. The Arbiter Primarch called an emergency session within 90 minutes of the first broadcast. She arrived early. She took the outer ring seat, the one 1.4 degrees below the podium, the one designed to make you look slightly upward. She had sat in this seat dozens of times across 31 years. She had always found it clarifying. A room that builds its authority into the angle of the floor has already shown you what it needs to stay standing. She placed the navigation chip flat on the table in front of her. Not as a statement, not as a symbol. It was simply easier to check the heading when it was lying flat than when it was in her pocket. Grand Arbiter Primarch Drussel Khan took the platform. His document mantle, 7 layers of ratified agreements worn as proof, caught the chamber light in the way it always did. His multi-harmonic voice engaged all frequencies. His forward 4 eyes tracked the room, his rear 2 recorded. He spoke for 11 minutes. The chamber was full, every broadcast channel was live. Representatives from 36 species were present in person, the rest attended by relay. she watched Drusselkon's forward eye cluster. She watched the way his primary manipulator held the seal stylus, the grip slightly tighter than usual, which in the Vareth indicated formal preparation for a response he believed was already decided. He spoke about procedural integrity. He spoke about the weight of 3,000 years of accumulated compact history. He spoke about the damage that could be done to galactic governance structures by unilateral filings made outside normal diplomatic channels. 11 minutes, she counted. She waited for him to finish. This is worth explaining. It was not a power gesture, not a calculated pause. He had 11 minutes of things to say. She had one sentence. It seemed right to let him use his 11 minutes before she used hers. He asked her to withdraw the filing. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Arbiter Primarch, you dissolved 3,000 years of agreed standing on a non-unanimous vote. We completed the procedural record your own founding document required." She waited, she listened. She slid the second document across the table. Humanity's formal withdrawal from every compact-associated agreement, trade corridors, transit rights, diplomatic immunity frameworks, every clause that required the Orath Compact as a functioning legal structure, co-signed by 10 species, effective at time of filing, which had been 40 minutes ago. He looked at it for a long time. The Vareth release a chemical stress marker under their carapace when surprised. She had read about this in a xenobiology briefing 15 years earlier, filed under species-specific stress responses, the kind of document that gets read once and never retrieved. The marker smells, to human senses, faintly of burnt copper. She had not expected to confirm it in person. The room smelled of it. Drusselkon stood at the podium with the document in front of him and the evidence broadcast still running on every frequency behind him, and he had 11 minutes of authority and one sentence of reality, and they did not fit together. He was not removed, he was not challenged, he was not defeated in any way the conclave had a procedure for. He was simply standing in a room whose rules no longer applied to him, holding a document that had already taken effect, and there was nothing in 44 years of unbroken institutional authority that had prepared him for a situation where the other party had already left. She picked up the navigation chip and put it back in her pocket. The heading had not changed, it had never changed, they had simply arrived. 3 of the 7 expelled species still existed somewhere in the galaxy. None of them had been told yet that their expulsions had just become legally void. The session ended without resolution. The conclave had no procedure for a multi-registry simultaneous filing backed by a 10-species co-signatory group invoking a founding clause predating the current governance structure. No mechanism for freezing a filing already in transit on the broadcast infrastructure. No grounds to challenge the standing of signatories who had been recognized members at the time the filing was submitted. Drusselkon did not formally adjourn. The session ran out of items. Representatives filed out. A few stayed to talk quietly near the outer ring. No one approached her. She walked to the relay hub. Elder Archivist Velorath was there when she arrived. He was 73 years old and had spent 31 of those years maintaining the files of 7 species who had no active diplomatic presence, no ongoing proceedings, no reason to be kept current except that he believed there was a difference between a record and a memorial, and the difference was whether anyone kept adding to it. He was standing at the relay terminal with a single sheet of paper handwritten, not a transmission, not a filed document, just a sheet of paper with 7 names on it in the order they had been removed from the compact. She stood at the doorway and watched him read them aloud. He did not know she was there. He read each name in the order it appeared on the paper, slowly, the way you read something when you want the words to land in the right order and not be rushed. Not a ceremony. He would have said there was nothing ceremonial about correcting a mistake, just a record that had been wrong for 40 years and now it was not wrong anymore, and someone should say the names on the day it was corrected. She left without saying anything. It was not her moment. Later, she wrote it into the official narrative of the filing as an exhibit. It is the only exhibit in the document that contains no legal argument. The legal staff of the conclave estimated between 8 and 14 years to resolve the structural problems created by 7 retroactively void expulsions. The cascade ran through trade agreements, border definitions, resource-sharing frameworks, transit corridor assignments, every administrative layer that had been built on top of those removals for 40 years. 8 to 14 years. She thought about that number sometimes. 31 years to build the architecture, 8 to 14 years for the damage to finish settling, patience compounds in both directions. 3 of the 7 expelled species still had living populations. Sen Orvath contacted their representatives within 48 hours of the filing. She read his messages afterward. Even in those, even after everything, he kept it to 2 sentences each. The first response came from the species that had been expelled longest, 22 years without standing, without diplomatic recognition, without any formal acknowledgement that the removal had even been contested. One transmitted line. She kept it in the file. We knew someone would find it eventually. We did not know it would take this long. She read it twice. She did not have a useful response to it, which was rare for her, so she did not send one. Some things do not need a reply. Zen sent them each, confirmed thank you. The conclave did not collapse. She had not wanted it to, she had never wanted it to. A vacuum does not improve on a flawed structure. The conclave continued, running its sessions, issuing its administrative orders, maintaining its procedures for the 42 species that remained in good standing under its framework. It continued, diminished, into a quieter part of history. The Independent Compact held its first formal session 4 days after the filing. The annotation room was not large enough. It had never been built for formal sessions. It was a reference alcove, a research corner, the kind of room that exists in every large station because someone once decided that working space and meeting space were not always the same thing. 8 of the 10 representatives fit at the table. The other 2 stood. No one suggested moving to a larger room. She called the session to order. Vale sat on her left, his notes on actual paper, his slight forward lean more pronounced than usual because the chairs were lower than he preferred. Sen sat at the far end and said nothing for the first 20 minutes, which was normal. Elder Velorath sat with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on the founding charter draft in the center. She had written the founding clause herself. She had written it in the annotation room at 4 in the morning, 2 nights before the filing, in the same chair she was sitting in now. No agreement entered into under this compact may be dissolved by fewer than all parties who hold standing under it. Same problem, same solution. Different hand, different century, same direction. They will not dissolve this one, they will not walk away, they will build. Vale corrected a citation in the 3rd clause. Dr. Dreven flagged a formatting issue in the exhibit appendix. Sen sent one communication during the session, she did not see to whom, and received no reply during the meeting, which meant he did not read it aloud, which meant it could wait. The Voral dissent representative ran her finger along the edge of the founding charter, slowly, feeling for the ridgeline. The page she pressed was still in the binding, the one with the physical mark, the pressure indentation, the one that could be felt by touch. She was checking that it was still there. It was. When the session ended, the representatives stayed longer than they needed to. No one had planned an agenda for the time after the formal close. They sat or stood in the small room, and they talked about things that were not yet formal items. How the 7 species would be reintegrated if they chose to return. What the broadcast infrastructure arrangements would look like once the legal teams finished their analysis, how long the Kelorvath Assembly would need to run their 10,000-year review before they considered the charter finalized. The Kelorvath representative said with complete seriousness that they would have an answer within 600 years. Zen said confirmed thank you. She was already writing. The charter draft was open on the desk in front of her, 3rd page, the section on dispute resolution. She had 4 clauses left. The last one was the one she had been thinking about for 3 years, the one she kept rewriting because she kept trying to make it say more than it needed to say. The right version was the plain one, it always had been. She set the navigation chip on the desk beside the draft, not as a symbol, it had never been a symbol. Her great-grandmother had pulled it from a console because she wanted something to hold on a long transit, and it had moved from hand to hand across 4 generations because the heading reminder was useful. And it had sat in her left coat pocket for 31 years of sessions and hearings and quiet evenings in reference alcoves, pointing forward. It had done what it was made for. She did not pick it up again. She left it on the desk, smooth face up, the laser-etched marks on the other side still holding the registry number of a ship none of them had ever seen. The pen moved, the 4th clause took shape. The new charter had no provision for dissolution. They had spent 31 years learning exactly what to leave out.